Hello everybody, in this video we are going to continue talking about linear inequalities, but this time we're going to focus on their graphs. How do we graph a linear inequality when we have one of the four inequality symbols? So one of the things that I'm going to do is go ahead and write out the four different inequality symbols, and then we're going to break down what that symbol actually does to our graph. So we have a less than equal to, a less than, greater than equal to, and a greater than sign. So depending on which one of these symbols is located in your equation, it is going to tell us what kind of line, because there's actually two types of lines that we're using for inequalities. You can have a solid line or a dashed line. We also have to shade. So depending on which one of these four symbols you have, it's going to tell you whether you're going to shade above your line or you're going to shade below that line. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the different kinds of lines. So right here it says inequality lines can be one of the following. We're going to start off with the solid line. This is the line that we're used to when we draw inequalities on our graph. They're just connected with one solid line. And then the second one is going to be a dashed line, or you can call it a dotted line. But a dashed line is going to have small breaks, and when you create these two lines, please make sure that your dashed line looks like a dashed line and cannot be confused with a solid line. So how do we know which one of the two we use? Well, it depends on the symbol. If you have one of these symbols that has the equal to line underneath it, we're going to use solid lines. So right here, I'm going to ask you to put less than equal to, greater than equal to. Only these two lines will give you a solid line on your graph. And sometimes just by looking at the inequality, you automatically know which one of the two you're going to have to draw. Dashed lines. Your dashed lines are going to be your inequality symbols that do not have the equal to line underneath it. So that's going to be your less than and your greater than. Now, shading. We are going to have to shade one of the two sides of our line, either above it or below it. So let's go ahead and write that in, above. And I'm actually going to go ahead and tell you above the y-intercept. We're going to use the y-intercept as our point of reference to determine what is above and what is below. So the other option is to shade below the y-intercept. So remember, the y-intercept we use to start our graph. It's the point on the y-axis. So we have to determine where are the numbers above or below, greater than or less than. All right, so let's talk about when we shade above. Now, there's only two symbols you're going to look at to shade above the y-intercept, and that is going to be your greater than equal to or your greater than. So both of them are greater than. So if you are still confused about which one of these signs is which, go ahead and write the word greater. And then below, we're going to use the less than symbols. So both less than equal to and less than. So I'm going to remind you that this is a less than symbol, and that is the only time we shade below the y-intercept. So with that being said, remember we cannot graph anything that's not in slope-intercept form. So please make sure to look at your equation and ensure that it is solved for y. If it is, you can pull out the slope, you can pull out the y-intercept, and you can start graphing that out. So all the steps that we're about to do at the beginning are the exact same steps we use for equations. We're just going to have to add those extra pieces for the inequality part. So let's go ahead and take this one. Ignore the fact that this is an inequality symbol. We don't need that right now. We'll need it at the end. So between these 2 points, our y-intercept is -2. This is our starting point. This is where we're going to begin our graph. Our slope is 4. But remember, we need a fraction to do rise over run. So we're going to say 4 over 1. I'm also going to ask you to write the opposite of this. So because this is a +4 over +1, we're going to do a -4 over -1. So that way we have two options to do our inequality or our line. All right, I'm going to go ahead and write in what I know about this symbol right here. So I'm going to draw a line so we can talk about what the symbol represents. The first thing I'm going to ask is this going to be a solid or a dotted line? So because this one does not have an equal to, it is going to be, and I keep on saying dotted, which means the same thing as dashed. So dashed line. And then for this one, we need to know if we're going to shade above or below. Because this is a less than, y is less than, we're going to shade below the y-intercept. And since we already know what the y-intercept is, we're going to say below -2. All right, so let's go ahead and graph this out. Our starting point is -2, so go to the y-axis, find -2. And remember that I always like to put another circle around our y-intercept because this is what we're going to reference when we determine are we shading above or below. All right, our slope tells us we're going to go up 4 and over to the right 1. So from here, remember this is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 over 1. 1, 2, 3, 4 over 1. And then I'm going to do the reverse one. I'm going to go back to my y-intercept. I'm going to go down 4 and over to the left. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then over to the left. All right, I'm going to take my ruler. We have already said that we're using a dashed line. And you're going to have to fight what you normally do because we don't need to draw a solid line. We need it to be dashed. And it needs to go from the top all the way to the bottom. So your line needs to cut your graph into two parts. All right, this one says we're going to shade below. So I'm going to take my highlighter. You can take your pencil or your pen. And I'm going to find -2, which was our starting point, which is right here. I'm going to use the y-axis as a point of reference. We are going to shade everything below the -2 on the y-axis. And so everything below all the numbers less than -2 would be down here. So that means I'm going to shade everything on this side of the line. So I'm going to continue, because I'm using a highlighter here, I'm not going to shade it completely. I'm just going to shade in the section, draw vertical lines to represent our shaded region, like this. And so there's a variety of ways to indicate that something is our solution set. So everything below this line on this side of the graph would be considered a solution to this inequality. Okay, let's look at another example very similar to this one. All right, once again, we have our inequality. It is already solved for y, so there's actually no work for us to do here. So let's go ahead and identify the y-intercept, the slope, the opposite slope, and then what kind of inequality we're going to represent. So for this one, between these two numbers, our y-intercept is -3. Our slope is 4 over 3, so we're going to write it in. And remember that the opposite of 4 over 3 would be a -4 over -3. I'm going to draw a line to represent the inequality portion. Go back to your inequality symbol, and that one has a line underneath it. It has an equal to line, so that tells us we're going to use a solid line to connect our dots. And because this is a greater than symbol, we are going to shade above the y-intercept. So we know that our y-intercept is -3, so we're shading above -3. All right, so from here, let's find our y-intercept, which is right here. Okay, I'm going to circle it because I need to come back to it to determine where we're going to shade. According to our slope, we need to go up 4 and to the right 3. So from here, this is my 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. And then I'm going to go back here, and this time I'm going to go down 4 and to the left 3. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 1, 2, 3. I'm going to remind you this one is a solid line. So the hardest part about doing inequalities is remembering that when we line this up to create the dashed line, because habit, if we depend on our habit, we naturally draw that solid line because that's what we're used to. So you have to remember when it's dotted to actually do a dotted or a dashed line. And I did the opposite. I gave you a dash when it's supposed to be solid. Let me go back and fill that in. It's a whole lot easier to fix it when it's supposed to be solid than when it's supposed to be dotted or dashed. All right. So find your -3, which was our y-intercept, and notice that we're shading everything above the -3. So if you look at your y-axis, you're going to notice that all the numbers greater than -3 are above it. So we're going to use that as our line. So I'm going to switch up my color here. And these are the numbers above the -3, which indicate that everything on this side is going to be our shaded region, our solution set. Okay. And so as you can tell, everything above this line would be considered part of the solution. Everything below the line would be considered not part of the solution, or something that would make it false. All right, so let's go ahead and look at this one right here. So I'm actually going to pause this video right here and jump into another one just to make sure that we have enough time to do the last 3 examples. So I will see you in the next video.